We can. We're recording.
Can you hear me out there?
Yes. We're good.
Okay, I hear you. Okay. Well, welcome, friends. U.L.T Day set aside to honor Robert Crosbie. Friendly philosopher, he's known as, who was the person who was responsible for resurrecting the original theosophy. So we're coming to you on Google Meet from the Washington, D.C., United Lodge of Theosophists. U.L.T Day, as I said, is a special day set aside for honoring Robert Crosbie, affectionately known as R.C., founder of U.L.T. All U.L.Ts in the world follow the declaration that he presented in establishing the first U.L.T. in Los Angeles on February 18, 1909. The declaration is now the same now as it was then. And it says, the policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical Movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a true realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds as the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has the Constitution, bylaws, non-officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards the theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. The form signed by associates of the United Lodge of Theosophists who choose to sign this, or most of them do, while being in sympathy with the purposes of this lodge as set forth in its declaration, I hereby record my desire to be enrolled as an associate. It being understood that such association calls for no obligation on my part other than that which I myself determine. R.C. molded this declaration from the writings of Helena, Petrovna, Blavatsky, who is known as the originator of this philosophy, and William Quan, who is known as the Preserver. R.C. rescued the pure writings of H.P.B. and W.Q.J, which were going out of print. He rescued pure theosophy by establishing U.L.T. along the lines laid down by H.P.B, the creator of pure theosophy, and W.Q.J, the preserver of pure theosophy. R.C. was born in Montreal on January 10, 1849. He was raised a Presbyterian, was invited to join the communion at age 16, but he considered himself still unfit. He determined to find the truth, which must be knowledge, and which must be found in due course by seeking it. He adopted an attitude of constant questioning as to life's object, pain, sickness, death, mercy, justice, fate. He was deeply interested in religious and philosophical subjects and found that the religion around him offered no satisfactory answers when he questioned them deeply. He moved to Boston in 1886. One day, R.C.'s business partner brought him news of the proposed establishment of a branch of the Theosophical Society in Boston. He recognized at once that this was what he was searching for, and he joined the Theosophical Society immediately. When W.Q.J. came from New York to speak, he was introduced to R.C., and they immediately formed a bond of friendship and trust. Of this first meeting with Judge Crosbie, a friend of mine, a friend of all time and future. R.C. was for many years the devoted and close companion of W.Q.J. and an occult pupil of H.P.B. Mr. Judge, in his lifetime, used to refer to students in New England states to Mr. Crosbie, saying, "Ask Crosbie, he thinks and acts as I do." R.C. supported the Judge's principles fully. He acted as one of the witnesses on the scene. He kept the link of pure theosophy unbroken after Mr. Judge's death. The hints given out by Mr. Judge during this life in regard to R.C. were not grasped by those around him who had what they fancied to be their own positions of authority. After the death of W.Q.J. and Mr. Judge, Catherine Tingley became prominent. She established an institution at Point Loma, California. At her request, R.C. joined the Point Loma group. R.C. left Point Loma after several years of trying to bring focus to the original teachings as left by H.P.B. and W.Q.J. He moved to South Pasadena, started a studies class using Mr. Judge's The Ocean of Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky's The Key to Theosophy as the first text study to be studied, and also the Bhagavad Gita, the Theosophy of 5,000 years ago. We're going to have two readings, one from H.P.B. and another from Mr. Judge, followed by a talk on R.C.'s establishment of U.L.T. along the lines laid down by H.P.B. and W.Q.J. Again, thank you for joining us. I'll say while I've got his dates were from January 10, 1849 is when he was born. July 25th, 1919 was when he passed from this life.
Okay, reading one from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. The wisdom religion is the inheritance of all the nations the world over. Our idea of the unknown universal deity represented by karma is that it is a power which cannot fail and therefore have neither wrath nor mercy, only absolute equity, which leaves every cause, great or small, to work out its inevitable effects. The saying of Jesus, "With what measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. Matthew 7:2. Neither by expression nor implication points to any hope of future mercy or salvation by proxy. This is why, recognizing as we do in our philosophy the justice of this statement, we cannot recommend too strongly mercy, charity, and forgiveness of mutual offenses. Resist not evil and render good for evil are Buddhist precepts, and were first preached in view of the implacability of karmic law. For man to take the law into his own hands is anyhow a sacrilegious presumption. Human law may use restrictive, not punitive measures, but a man who, believing in karma, still revenges himself and refuses to forgive every injury, thereby rendering good for evil, is a criminal and only hurts himself. It is an occult law that no man can rise superior to his individual failings without lifting, be it ever so little, the whole body of which he is an integral part. In the same way, no one can sin nor suffer the effects of sin alone. When every individual has contributed to the general good what he can, of money, of labor, and of ennobling thought, then and only then will the balance of national karma be struck, and until then we have no right nor any reason for saying that there is more life on the earth than nature can support. All pain and suffering are results of want of harmony, and that the one terrible and only cause of the disturbance of harmony is selfishness in some form or another. Hence, karma gives back to every man the actual consequences of his own actions, without any regard to their moral character. But since he receives his due for all, it is obvious that he will be made to atone for all suffering which he has caused, just as he will reap in joy and gladness the fruits of all the happiness and harmony he had helped to produce. It is disbelief in the just law of retribution that is more likely to awaken every combative feeling in man and child, as much as a man resents a punishment or even a reproof he believes to be unmerited, far more than he does a severe punishment if he feels that it is merited. Belief in karma is the highest reason for reconcilement to one's lot in this life, and the very strongest incentive towards effort to better the succeeding rebirths. Make men feel and recognize in their innermost hearts what is their real, true duty to all men, and every old abuse of power, every iniquitous law in the national policy based on human, social, or political selfishness will disappear of itself.
Reading number 2 from the writings of William Q. Judge. Some years ago, one of those masters in whom so many of our members believe directed H.P.B. to write a letter for him to a certain body of Theosophists. In this, he said that each member could become, in his own town or city, if earnest, sincere, and unselfish, an active center from which would radiate unseen powerful forces able to influence men and women in the vicinity for good, and that soon inquirers would appear, a branch in time be organized, and thus the whole neighborhood would receive benefit. This seems just and reasonable, in addition to its being stated by such high authority. Members ought to consider and think it over so that action may follow. Too many who think themselves theosophically alone in their own town have folded their hands and shut up their minds, saying to themselves that they could do nothing, that no one was near who could possibly care for theosophy, and that that particular town was the most difficult for the work. The great mistake in these cases is getting the law indicated in what H.P.B wrote. It is one that every member ought to know, that the mind of man is capable of bringing about results through means of other minds about him. If we sit and think that nothing can be done, then our subtle minds meet other minds within the radius of our sphere, not small, and shouts into them, nothing can be done. Of course, then, nothing is done. But if unselfishly and earnestly we think theosophy and desire that others should, like us, be benefited by it, then to the minds we meet in stray moments of the day and in many hours of the night we cry, Theosophy, and help and hope for thee. The result must be an awakening of interest upon the slightest provocative occasion. Such an inner attitude, added to every sort of attempt at promulgation, will disclose many unsuspected persons who are thinking along this very line. Thus will the opportunity of the hour be taken advantage of. The masters have said this is a transition age, and he who has ears to hear will hear what has thus been said. We are working for the new cycles and centuries. What we do now in this transition age will be like to what the Dian Kohans did in the tradition point, the midway point of evolution, at the time when all matter and all types were in transition and fluid state. They then gave the new impulse for the new types, which resulted later in all the vast varieties of nature. In mental development, we are now at the same point, and what we now do in faith and hope for others and for ourselves will result similarly on the plane to which it is all directed. Thus, in other centuries, we will come out again and go on with it. If we neglect it now, so much the worse for us then. Hence, we are not working for some definite organization of the new years to come, but for a change in the manas and buddhi of the race. That is why it may seem indefinite, but it is nevertheless very defined and very great in scope.
Good afternoon, friends, and right now we'll continue the introduction that was started before the readings and take a little bit deeper dive into the life of Robert Crosbie and the evolution of Theosophic movement, starting with 1888 and concluding with the establishment of the first lodge in California in 1909. So going back to the 1888, when Crosbie was introduced to the Theosophical Society in Boston, one of the observations from reading the literature about his involvement was that his commitment and devotion to the movement was immediate and complete. From 88 to 89, basically in 1 year, he becomes the secretary of the Theosophical Society. So he immediately assumes leading roles in the movement. And after the death of H.P.B in 91, this is when he's being appointed by Mr. Judge to be basically overseeing and promoting the movement in 7 northeastern states. So he becomes responsible for the whole northeastern region. After the death of H.P.B, again, after the loss of her as a sort of convener and someone who was promoting the movement across the Europe and Americas, the new structure is being set up, and that new structure becomes very important in the future and the establishment of the lodge. And that new structure involves division between the west and the east of the Theosophical movement. Basically, the agreement is made that Crosbie will be overseeing the Americas and Australia, the West, and it was Annie Besant who was overseeing the East, Europe, England, and Asia. Some division was necessary as responsibility was really enormous when the movement was growing. In 92, Crosbie is suffering huge personal losses and turbulences in his personal life. And I also would like to introduce a little bit more of him as a person to really show his commitment to Theosophical movement beyond any personal challenges or his personal life. In '92, as he's starting to get involved more and more in Theosophical Society and assuming the role of the secretary and the person who is responsible for the northeastern states and the west side of the movement, he's having a large strain on his family. He has a daughter who is quite ill and requires lots of attention. His relationship with his wife at times suffers, and in '92, he's going through legal separation and divorce. So this is 1892, quite a difficult time for him. He sells his business, he leaves his house to his wife, and at this point fully devotes himself to the Theosophical Society and Theosophical Movement. Further tragedy befalls when fire ensues in the house with his wife and his children, and all of them die. The same year, Crosbie, despite his personal losses, he leads the first convent of American, fifth convention of American section of Theosophical Society. That was a large undertaking, and he acts as a president of Boston Theosophic Society. After the fifth convention in '95, he is very involved in the eighth convention of the Theosophic Society. And this eighth convention is very important for the Theosophic Society because this is when Theosophic Society in America is established as a separate entity, a separate organization. It is then when he makes a very, very known statement that we continue to repeat now in decades and centuries, and I would like to read it. He writes that the unity of Theosophical movement does not depend upon the singleness of organization, but upon the similarity of work and aspiration, and that this will keep the link unbroken. So already then he understands and sees that the movement itself does not anchor and does not depend on the existence and promotion of any specific organization. 94 and 96 are very important years that become basically the crucial years that lead later to establishment of the lodge. And those are sort of the, I would say, darker years in the Theosophical movement. This is when there is a fallout between the Western and the Eastern branch of the movement. And this is when the descent of opinions occur between the Bizant and Alcott and Mr. Judge. This is where lots of accusations made against him in the Americas, and there is a clear that this will not lead to any future consensus. Soon after he dies, and that leaves the Eastern Theosophical Society leaderless until appointment of Miss Fingley, and she was mentioned in his diary, so she comes into the scene. However, she is very little known to the Theosophic Society. She is more of a newcomer and sort of brings her own new ideas to the table that may not be accepted by the rest. So there's lots of turmoil happening internally. At this point, Miss Fingley calls Mr. Crosbie to move to Point Loma, California, and continue work there. What he does, he moves to Point Loma, where they work together, and he does express again his concerns about some aspects of the leadership of organization, and that does not lead again to consensus. In 1904. He has a discussion with Miss Fingley where he expresses his desire to leave. At the same time, she positioned it as he's being expelled from the Theosophical Society. If you go to the records of the Theosophical Society at Point Loma, in the archives against his name, there is a big red writing, Miss Crosbie expelled. At the same time, in 1900s, now we're bringing his personal life in the picture again to show his commitment to the Theosophical movement. In 1900, just 4 years before this event, he gets remarried. He has 2 children. Lots of his property and personal possessions have been donated to the Theosophical Society and Point Loma. In 1904, when he is when he made a decision to leave, and when the Theosophical Society recorded him as being expelled, none of these possessions are being returned to him. So that fact alone speaks so much for itself of what is happening. He leaves in 1904 with a new family, with 2 children, completely penniless, with all of his property staying with the Theosophical Society in Point Loma. He finds a job, I believe, with Los Angeles Times, where he's starting to work just to earn any living. And he settles in California at this time, in Pasadena. And in 1906, he is basically starting a study group with his neighbors. It is a very, very low-key undertaking. It's people who know him, it's people who surround him, and he's studying at Theosophical classes and Theosophical study group with this small group of people. They study Ocean of Theosophy, they study Key to Theosophy, and Bhagavad Gita. Those were the 3 core documents that were taken for the studies. That study group basically becomes the foundation of the first U.L.T. that was established in 1909. And it actually was established under the charter of the America's Theosophic Society. Well, the reason that we went over the fallout with the Theosophical Society, the Point Loma, the descent between Alcott Besant and Mr. Judge, all those things are very important in the foundation of the U.L.T. and in the principles of U.L.T. Because if we look deeper at what happened, it was basically the Theosophic movement was constrained into organization that had power to dismiss or admit. It became, it was in a way, it was starting to form into sorry to use the word, into a new Vatican. And this was not where H.P.B. or Mr. Judge or R.C. saw the movement going. So for them, it was very important to keep it as a movement that is not associated with organizations, where organizations do not have power over the individual and where no one can expel or remove people just because of any personal dissent or because of any organizational statute. Even though the Theosophical Society at that time was run on basis of constitution, election of the leadership, it still led to this fallout that should not have happened among the Theosophists. So when Mr. Crosbie set up U.L.T. in 1909, all of these experiences played into the foundation of how he saw U.L.Ts being set up, where organizations would be not overruling any individuals, where Theosophists would not be bound to organizations, where anonymity and, in a way, non-leadership structure would be prevailing. And that was a very critical decision and a difficult decision because we know that organizations thrive on structure. And the decision here was not to have that structure, not to have leadership, not to have any hierarchy, and not to have anything personal. So things that happened in the past would not repeat. So this is why we went over the events in Point Loma, not again to bring about the divisions, to bring light to the foundations of U.L.T. and the principles of U.L.T. And we will go a little bit later to that as well. So now we will return back to the setup of U.L.T. in 1909. And in 1910, very important works done by Mr. Crosbie, and those are the letters called In the Beginning, published in a Friendly Philosopher. And they're written to the students of Theosophy. And today we very much look at that link. This is the link between the Crosbie, Judge, and H.P.B. And to the original literature and the original publications by H.P.B. About their Theosophy. In 1912, the next important event, this is when the Theosophy magazine is being set up, and Crosbie becomes the chief editor. And he actually remains the chief editor until his death. The next important event is 1919, actually 1960. This is actually a very critical event in the movement because it leads to its future. It basically symbolizes the future of the movement. In 1916, Crosbie sets up a Theosophical school for children, and there are two schools set up in San Francisco and Berkeley. The movement is looking into the future. It's realizing that education of children is very important in the principles of Theosophy. So in 1916, the first two schools are set up, and Mr. Crosbie is very active contributor to the books, text, as well as songs and music for the schools. And that leads to the last important event that I want to note, and this is 1919 and publication of the article, or I guess a publication of U.L.T. and its mission and future. So this is really where Ms. Crosbie formulates what is the future for U.L.T. and Theosophical Movement and what its mission is. And I want to read just one passage from it that I think is very critical to understanding of what link we all are keeping unbroken until today. It says that the real unity, the real internationalism of the Theosophical Movement, and he seldom uses attribution to anything, any organization. He calls Theosophic Movement, he always addresses Theosophy as Theosophic Movement. So the real unity and the real internationalism of the Theosophical Movement are therefore not to be looked for in any form of organization. And the best attempt at not linking the movement to organization was the foundations of the U.L.T., the way the U.L.Ts were set up, the way they're run, the way the non-hierarchical participation of all students work and anonymity of the U.L.Ts, but are to be found in the similarity of aim, aspiration, of purpose, of teaching, and of ethics. And that unity of aim is what we call the unbroken link from Crosbie to Judge and to H.P.B. in looking at the original text. Because what was very concerning in 1996, when the descent occurred, this is when the new masters, new teachers, new psychics started appearing and sort of bringing new ideas. And it was very important at that time to keep the teachings pure to its origin, because it's very easy, especially in the beginning of the movement, to dilute them with all of the new ideas and aspirations. So this similarity of aim, aspiration, and purpose, of teaching and of ethics can be summed up in a very simple terms of basically keeping that link unbroken to the original teachings and to the service to humanity. And it's very simple. There's just two things of link to the original teaching, service to humanity. And that is being achieved by anonymity, non-hierarchical approach to the lodges, and our service to each other and to humanity using the teachings that were left to us. And having gone over all of this, I would like to again read the declaration in light of everything that we have covered in the talk and reflect on it as it is the foundation of the lodges and of its mission and its future. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy. And here it's very important to note independent. It's not dependent on any organization or any opinions, without professing attachment to any Theosophical organization. And you can see how this reflects on the situation on Point Loma with the Theosophical Society. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical Movement, but does not concern itself with dissension or differences of individual opinion. And again, in being loyal to the founders of the Theosophical Movement, this is where we keep the link unbroken going to the judge and H.P.B herself. The work it has on hand, and at the end it keeps in view, are too absorbing and too lofty to live in the time of inclination to take part in side issues. This work and that end is the dissemination of the foundational principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. And that passage reminds that whatever descent that may happen, as we're all human beings, and that may happen, there may be descent of opinions and divisions. None of this matters in light of the mission that we have to carry in the future, and that the realization of self and conviction in the universal brotherhood that at the end unites us all. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, whether and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, and so bond between its associates being that basis. And here we go to the lack of constitution, bylaws, officers. It is a very challenging undertaking to have a movement, to have organizations that do not have the foundational principles of organization. And the fact that today we're celebrating the U.L.T. Day is a proof that this can work, that U.L.Ts were able to accomplish and keep that very difficult structure. It aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And that's again very important addition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. So this talk will be concluded at that, and I wish everyone a happy U.L.T. Day. Yes, we have a last reading now.
Reading 3 from the writings of Robert Crosbie. When we are convinced of the truth of a matter, there is no reason why we should not voice that conviction as strongly as the case demands. But there is no reason why, in such case, we should demand acceptance of it. In our case, we do not demand acceptance of theosophy. We point out its principles and their applications. Theosophy makes certain statements as being matters of knowledge by perfected men, but not as statements to be believed. It is shown that such knowledge, being acquired by them from observation and experience in many bodies, can be reached by all men, and the ways to do are so pointed out. Do we doubt our ability? As long as we really do so, we shall never make much success. We learn to know our ability by using it to the limit. Mistakes need not worry us. If they represent conscientious and unwearied efforts, we can learn through the mistakes we make. It is pure selfishness to desire to know that any advice course will benefit us. Advice can be given, but knowledge is acquired. Personal results should not be looked for. We should do things because they are the right things to do, and not because they will be of benefit to us. All our vacillations, fears, and despondencies arise from a personal attitude. H.P.B says, the progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, not being sticks nor stones. But human beings, we must feel success or failure. The wisdom is shown in not being swelled up by the one or cast down by the other. We should make a steady and varying pursuit of that which is seen to be right. To point out where a system of thought is inadequate, however, is not tearing it down. The motto of Theosophists is, There is no religion higher than truth, and all philosophies must be able to stand the most rigid and critical examination in its light, or they are valueless. Everything must stand upon its own merits. We have but to go on with the work. We have but to keep continually in mind and heart the original lines laid by H.P.B and W.Q.J, namely unity first, as a focus of it for spiritual growth and mutual strength. Study, that the knowledge of the movement, its purpose, its teachers, and its message may be had. Work upon ourselves in the light of that study and for others first, last, and all the time. Excerpt from the Friendly Philosopher. One of the greatest helps that Theosophy gives is the power to take a wider survey of the field of action than is otherwise possible. We do not look on this life only, but on many future lives during which I and thou and all the princes of the earth will live and strive for the universal redemption of mankind, ever looking ahead, ever seeing further heights toward which the awakening spirit may be directed. There is much strength. There are many faculties among men, and mostly used without direction of a permanent nature. Could right philosophy be implanted, even the single idea of the divine nature in men, a greater impetus would be given to right living. Then a philosophy in accord with this nature would be sought by those so quickened. Theosophy, pure and simple, is the standard by which efforts may be applied and errors combated. So it must always be kept in evidence as the source of all right act.
Thank you, Frank, for all of the efforts you put into presenting this, and thank you all for joining us, especially. So, was it Mr. Judge that said, "Give me 5 good people, and I can change the world"? Well, there are still only a few of us in this movement, but we have some very good people in this movement, and we are changing humanity. We the people change very slowly, but we are changing, and this is one of the reasons for this is for this philosophy. Look at science; it has changed by leaps and bounds since the late 1800s. Compare science with the books and sacred doctrine and so forth, and you see that the basis was for that change was presented at that time. Emerson and some of the rest of them were also involved in that change. So don't take a few numbers as meaning this is not a successful adventure. It is a successful adventure. It's the only way we will achieve unity and advance humanity in faith. We are gods in training, is what this says in philosophy. So I'll end it at that. Next week, in a Google Meet. And we're looking forward to continuing with that work. And we're here on Google Meet anyway, at 11 o'clock every Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. See you next week.
Okay.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Rededicate ourselves to this study wherever we're gathered. If you're there by yourself, rededicate yourself to it. And the group here is will be having a little gathering to get to know each other and continue on. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Never.